radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. That's right. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2026. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Let's do this, man. Here we go. Another week on Fade to Black. Tonight, Vic Bongiorno is with us. We're going to be talking about the Valentich UFO case over there in Australia and some other stuff tonight. It's going to be a great conversation. Great way to start the week. Tomorrow night, Ben Hansen returns. We're going to be talking about the social media side of disclosure tomorrow night with TV personality Ben Hansen. Always great when he's here. Then Wednesday night, here we go, kids. Jason Quitspiracy 15. Or is it? And then Thursday night, AMA, AJA, it's our once a month Ask Jimmy Anything. That's right, I just spoke about myself in the third person. Yeah, so that's the week coming up on Fade to Black. Always great. At the end of this month is the Contact Modalities Expo. It's my next event. It is May 1st through the 3rd, 2026 in Delavan, Wisconsin at the Lake Lawn Resort. Contact Modalities Expo. That's XPO. contactmodalitiesexpo.com. Very excited about that. Busy month ahead. And in between all of that, of course, I have Beyond Belief that I have to tape out there in Boulder. I think that's going down. I'm not even sure. I think it's next week. All right. I wanted to say something before we got started. I'll make this quick. I have I've got a guilty pleasure that I want to share with everybody. All my other pleasures you guys are well aware of, but I have a guilty pleasure, and it is, I don't even know what they're called, but I am going to put it this way: Canadian comedy sitcoms. Okay, let me say that again. Canadian comedy sitcoms. They're really, really good. And if you want to get a taste, I'll name 3 really quick. All right. You guys got to go with me on this. Canada has a way, their comedy is a bit different. All right. And it's also vanilla. It's not offensive. it's not Dave Chappelle, and who I love, but or Bill Burr. No. Okay, so Kim's Convenience. Have you seen that? Go and binge it. Kim's Convenience. All right. And another one called, Kim's Convenience is a comedy sitcom, takes place in a convenience store called Kim's Convenience. It's hilarious. It's amazing. So well done. Has launched a lot of careers, by the way. And another one takes place in a library, and it's called Shelved. Go and check that out. It's so good. And there's another one out called Strays, and that takes place in an animal shelter. All 3 of these shows take place in Toronto, right? And they're really, really, really good. And the star of Shelved, she's also in Kim's Convenience. And there's some but the writing, it's just really good. It's no laugh tracks. It's just well-written, well-acted stuff. Canadian Canadian sitcom comedies. Somebody help me, please. That's what my life has turned into. Canadian sitcom comedies. They're so well done. Go check them out. All right. Let's get this cracking. I'm in a great mood. I had an amazing weekend. The weather's right out here. I rode both of my bikes all weekend long. Got a lot of work done too as well. But it was just one of those weekends where I was able to just kind of regroup and get my feet back on the ground before heading back out into the madness of the rest of this month and leading into next month. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about the Valentich UFO case. We have talked about that many times on this show. I've done a few shows with Christina Gomez on this case. Australia is fascinating to me. It's a big place. There's a lot going on out there. And central to, how do I say this? Central to UFO history, there are two cases for me that are really, really, really high in all of ufology. One is the Valentich case, and of course, the other one is Westall, and two huge cases. So tonight we're going to talk about Valentich with Vic Bongiorno, and he's a pilot. He's also an author. And we're going to talk about this 1978 case. His links for bush pilots, by the way, are below. So tonight we're going to do the deep dive, and I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Vic. Say, I know it's Bongiorno, but I want you to say it. Say your last name.
Okay. Look, before I say that, Jimmy, if I break out into Australian, you have to pull me up, right? Because you Americans don't understand Australian, okay? Vic Bongiorno.
Like it should be. Like it should be.
You know, when I was hitchhiking across America in '79, people would pick me up and they'd say, and this was going back before social media, and they'd say, you know, you speak mighty good English for an Australian. And I think they were getting me mixed up with Austrian. But anyway, that doesn't matter. But sometimes we do clip our words a bit and you have a bit of a problem with us. But yeah.
Well, okay. You brought it up, not me. I'm going to say this. Americans in general, like Americans across the United States, love Australia. It's a weird, I don't know what it is about our affection for Australia. We don't have the same, those vibrations don't go down with Canada. They don't go down with the UK. They don't go, okay, Italy, a little bit, Egypt, okay, all right. We love Australia. It's crazy.
It could be Paul Hogan, probably.
Well, hey, there's a reason why he was a hit.
Yeah, that's right. You know, his boundaries, well, he didn't have boundaries. And I think the Americans really quite like that. But
yeah. And that, you know what? You're right about, I think that's a big part of it. Australians in general just do their own thing. That's it.
Well, let's just say that we're genuine. We're pretty straight up. You know, we like to be straight up. That's an American term, and we are. I don't think we beat around the bush. So
no. And then though, and I bring this up every time I have somebody from Australia on the show, a couple times a month. But I'll always bring up, as much as Australia is cool and adventurous and, you know, that cowboy mentality, do you think? Okay, there's that. And then there's Wolf Creek.
Whoa.
Right. And you're like, wait a minute. Australians aren't supposed to be like this. And that was just this. We don't need to spend any time on it. But the way that Wolf Creek, because it was centered, it started at the meteor crater, right? And
in the movie, but it's based on a few realities. It's based on a few stories.
Yes. And then, I remember, so I see the movie, and then I jump into the story, and I get the documentary, and then I got a couple of other things. When I found out it was based on true reality, I thought it was just like a horror film. And then and I was like, what is
I
oh,
couldn't really watch it. I sort of it's too close to bone. But I'm a bit of a softie.
You don't look like a softie.
John Jarrett is our local actor. He did a very good job. Very good job.
Yeah. That movie really freaked me out. And then jumping into the case and seeing the reality of it all, it just frightening. It's always more frightening when it's based on something real.
Yeah.
And those two guys, wow. Okay, so moving on from let's move on. When as a pilot, I want to really jump into this. And because you're a pilot, and a bush pilot at that, your pilot training and everything else that you have to do to get a license, what's involved. And when we go back and look at Frederick, and his age, he was 20, but he was going through the process. He wanted to be a commercial pilot. And at his level at that time, and we'll jump into the case now, he had about, and more than me, but he had like 150 hours or so flying time. And that's
not a lot.
But it's good enough that he could fly solo, right? Okay.
Oh yeah. The point I'm making, he was good for the hours he held. He was good for the hours he held. I can see that in his records and from the comments and from the people who knew him, Jimmy. And I've gone into that in some depth. And you know what the most important point about all this is? 48 years later, no one ever has. Why? Why is that the case? I'll tell you. When I moved to, and this is in the book, all right, I had a bit of a problem with careers. I swapped around a lot, and I had a farm for a while. Then I moved to Apollo Bay. I was already holding a commercial license, and I thought, well, I'll start a business here, which I did. And that was in 98, actually, I moved there. And I got rolling in about end of 1999, 2000. And I made some inquiries about Frederick. And every time I asked the question, because even then it was like, 78 till then, it was 22 years previous, people said, let it go. He wasn't quite, up to the job. He wasn't quite right, or whatever you want to do. I want to be politically correct here, but they just said he wasn't, it wasn't all happening for Fred. He was, his own worst enemy. And there's nothing that makes you drop an investigation quicker than to think, well, the problem's at his end. Why would I investigate him? So I went along for another couple of decades. And it's funny how things evolve and you think, well, that was meant to be. And I, along the way, kept putting things in my file, my electronic file or my physical file. And I ended up with a lot of information. And as I said, I talk about this in the book. I got sick at the end of 22 and I was laid up for a while. And a few things precipitated me going back in to investigate this mystery. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, this is not right. There's a cover up here. There's something, I didn't use the words cover up to myself, but I thought, no, this is worth investigating. And one of the things, there were three things that really made me put my head down on this. Number one was a tape recording that I got from old friend of mine who was a beef farmer out on King Island, which is about 50 nautical miles to the south. It was the destination where this boy was heading that night. And she told me, I recorded this on a Walkman, and she told me what she'd seen in that intervening period around the time of Fred's disappearance, and what a lot of other people had seen on King Island. And it you know how we were talking before about UFOs, it was very similar. There was some really, really unusual events. But the most important thing to note about that, Jimmy, was it was all pre-connectivity. So all these people have got the same story. How did they know? Like on the mainland and around the island, they're all saying this same thing's occurring. Well, you know, it's like it's not in the newspaper. How do they know? Because they've seen it. That's how they know. And that's all over the world. And what you saw the other night, you know, you've seen it. And that's a common, that 3 lights, Fred said it had 3 lights, but I don't know if it's the same ship. God knows what we're dealing with here. But anyway, so there was that interview with her. That was one thing. An interview with one of the locals at Apollo Bay. He sadly passed away now, but fortunately I got him on tape, and I spent some time with him, and he showed me around about what he'd seen. And his name was Merv O'Meara. He was a great guy. And he was the harbour master there at Apollo Bay for a lot of years, born and bred. Like he you know, he's Apollo Bay local. And Fred was Merv was very upset with the locals because he reported something to the locals and they vilified him. They made him feel very uncomfortable about what he saw. So he went to ground with it. And not only did he go to ground with it, he went to ground in his personal life too. Didn't show up much, and it affected him. And when I sat down to interview him, not long before he passed, I mean, he was still quite lucid and mobile, you know, a few years before he passed. He was very frank about what he'd seen, and he was very keen for me to take it on. Because
hold on, Vic. I need you to move closer to the computer for the audio.
Yeah. How's that?
Okay.
How's
so
that?
What was it that he saw?
Well, he was coming back to the township one evening with his nieces and nephews his daughter and son and niece and nephew in the back. And they were driving down the road. They'd been rabbiting. You know what rabbiting is? In Australia, we go out shooting rabbits. That's rabbiting. And it was a bit of a pastime in the days gone by, but it's probably not so common these days. So they'd been rabbiting and they'd had a nice day, and they were heading back down the Barham River Road behind Apollo Bay, when his niece said to him from the back, "Uncle, what's that in the sky?" And he said, "I kept driving." And we went out on site. I saw this. I was there. He showed me. He bracketed it. And he said, "We were here. I saw this. We were here. I saw that." His recollection was very definite. I thought it was very sincere. And she said he looked around and he said, "Look, I can't see anything." He's driving the car, right? He's driving the car down dirt road. He said, "I can't see anything." And she said, "There it is, Uncle. There it is up there in the sky again." He said he looked around. He said, "Oh," he said, "I see it. That's an aeroplane." And she said, "Yeah, I can see the aeroplane, but what's that behind it?" And there was a big orb. He said, "I pulled up," and he said there was a big orb following this plane. He was on descent, on a steep descent, right at last light, with a big green orb right behind him. And I'm saying, "Well, how far?" And he said, "Look, it's hard for him to judge. It was a long time ago. He's thinking only, a few hundred feet behind it, right as he descended." And we went into the details of that. And I think that what he'd held that story for a lot of years. It was 2018. He saw it in 1978. So you do the maths on that. That's 40 years. Now, concurrent with his story was his wife, Pat. And she's some sort of I think she's sort of she's got to be included in this. Although she wasn't in the car, he got home that night and they told her the story. The kids' mum told her the story, and she said, "Oh, I'll leave that one go. You know, UFO, I'll let it go." But a night or two later on the news, it's reported that Fred reported a UFO. Now, she remembers that. She remembers his story, and she remembers that. So she's some sort of a witness in this, you know, a passive witness to this whole thing, and she hasn't changed her story either. Now, and I think that's valid. Now, okay, so it's a story that he's stuck to all these years. But the one thing about it, Jimmy, it fits with the timeline. If I reconstruct this man's Fred's flight path.
Okay, actually, that's a good. Let's do that really quick. What was the timing of that evening in October in 1978? Let's set all of that up as a foundation, and then we'll come back to the wife and the uncle and the nephews.
Okay, so he departed Moorabbin. I think it was about 6:18 or 6:19, Moorabbin Airport, Melbourne. And he's flying down the coast to Cape Otway and then across the body of water to King Island. Now, you had to do that those days because they made you fly the shortest leg over water. It wasn't, you know, they were trying to be safe, but it wasn't any safer. So they've dropped that now. But in those days, you had to do that. So you fly down the coast to Cape Otway, then you do the 50 nautical miles, like over water to King Island. So he's flown down to Cape Otway and he's reported his position at Cape Otway exactly at 7 p.m. All right, 7 p.m. and 20 seconds or something. Okay, so he's made his report at Cape Otway. Then he's taken up a heading south-southeast towards King Island. 6 minutes after Cape Otway, he's requested traffic, meaning he's asked Melbourne Flight Service, is there any traffic in the area? Which means, are there any other aircraft around me that you've got on your radar or in your flight plans? La, la, la. The man at the time was a very lovely man. Unfortunately, we buried him about 6 months ago, and I was very, very sad that he didn't get to see this book. And his name was Steve Roby. And he replied, no traffic. Now, there's a 6-minute interview that you can find online. You've got it. I've sent it to you, about the interchange between them. Now, that's at 6 minutes past 7 local time, right? And it ended about 12 minutes past 7. And last light is 18 minutes past 7, right? So there was 6 minutes prior to last light, his last conversation ended. I've got photos in my book of the Otways at last light, and you can still see the horizon on a lovely night. You can still see everything. But nonetheless, the main finding was that Fred suffered from spatial disorientation. He couldn't see his horizon, so he spun out and entered the water. He got confused. There's a number of different scenarios, which I talk about in detail in the book. He was looking at Venus, which wasn't even in his field of vision, Jimmy. He was tracking 155, and Venus was 100 degrees off to his right. So it wasn't even in his field of vision. It would have even been behind his wing. So he wouldn't have been focusing on Venus, and it's not even a thing, you know, like it's not even an aviation thing where you're going to concentrate on a star and fall in the sea. But they made that up. And this spatial disorientation, another big one on the books was that he was depressed, and he'd gone out there to commit suicide because he couldn't pass his aviation exams. Again, I go into this in detail in the book. He had problems passing his aviation exams for the very simple reason that he'd taken on far too much. and I know what it's like, and I know what it's like to fail these exams. Anyone who's a pilot will know they really play with your head. They're intense. They're only short, but you've got to be on the ball, and you shouldn't be working at the time. If you're working, you really have got headwinds if you're doing that. He was working full time. He took on too many subjects, so he was having trouble passing. He did pass a few. It's a matter of conjecture just how many he did pass, but he did pass a few, and he was headed to getting his commercial license. Had this not happened, he would have been a captain. I've got no doubt about that. And I talk about this in detail in the book. So they ran him down from that perspective too. They said he was, the official report, the Department of Transport, the official FOI documents reflect all this. They reflect all this. And they come back with no finding in terms of really what happened to him. They couldn't settle on anything. But interestingly, Jimmy, and he spoke about this for some minutes, about this UFO, what it was doing in his local area, what it was doing. They never, ever said UFO. They never mentioned it. They never said it was a possible cause of his demise. And furthermore, Jimmy, what's amazing about this subject is no missing persons report. No coroner's report, just gone, just
ended. And he and pilot or not, just human observation. If you are reporting, and in this case it's a pilot going to tower, that there is another aircraft 1,000 feet above him, and then he says, well, no, it's not an airplane. Okay, so that right there is full stop, isn't it? I mean, isn't that all you need to go, okay, there's something else going on here? Did he have a collision with another aircraft in the flight path? Was it terrestrial? Was it something else? Was it something unexplainable? But just that, isn't that information enough for an investigation?
Well, look, Jimmy, number one, I'm not a UFO watcher. They don't keep me awake. I don't Google UFOs. I don't, if one comes my way, I think that's kind of interesting. I do think something is happening. I do think something.
Have you ever? Okay, you're a pilot. Have you seen?
No,
anything?
I haven't. No, I haven't. No.
Do you?
No, I haven't.
Do you
personally?
Want to?
I haven't.
Do you want to?
Well, I did see a whole line of Elon Musk satellites go over one night, and boy, that was scary. But
yeah, that's pretty fun. That's pretty fun.
Yeah, there's about 200 of them. I don't know what he was doing up there, but I think he was spying on me. But anyway, I'm not a UFO watcher, but there was something very genuine in his voice, and I want to make the point that Steve Roby, who was a pilot himself and also a flight service officer, and he'd spoken to a lot of young pilots or pilots per se in compromised conditions. He knew what stress was. He felt this person had control of the aircraft and was telling the truth till the day he died. He thought that, and I think he's right, because I have had access in the past to the actual tape. Now that's very coveted, and it's gone missing from the original files, and I've listened to that tape on various occasions, and I'm firmly of the belief that boy was fully in control of his aircraft. I'm firmly in the belief that. So that were the three things. There was Vivian's tape recording, which had a lot of things I could correlate her experience and what she said with other people who'd seen things. There was a commonality there. How would she know that? She's an old lady living there raising cattle on King Island. How would she know all those things? There was Merv's witness testimony to me, which fitted perfectly with the timeline and perfectly with what I think happened to Fred. And then there was this recording. When I had those three things and I put them together, and I had my little bit of an interruption with my chest, I was sitting in my lounge room one evening, and they said ABC is going to do a special on Frederick Valentich tonight. I thought, oh well, that's good. That'll be be entertaining. I couldn't do anything else, so I turned it on. I watched it for half an hour, and I turned it off. Might have been 40 minutes or something. I turned it off, and I thought, well, you know what? That was coal porridge. That was just absolutely coal porridge. No one's done any work. No one's done any investigation. And why? It gets back to what I said. They didn't do it because they thought he was compromised mentally. They thought he wasn't. It was his fault. They thought he was setting this up. There's nothing that'll make you drop an investigation quicker, Jimmy, than that. But when the facts came out and I started to look at them, I thought, no, their FOI reports are full of inconsistencies, irregularities, and just plain untruths. They're full of them. And one of the other primary witnesses, I have a few primary witnesses, but I went to the trouble of collating it all, was the witness of his young, at the time, his young fiancée, Rhonda. And she talks about the things that happened to her as a result of this investigation, and they weren't fair. And I think there is probably another story in this whole book besides UFOs. I think there's an apology needed. I really do. Fred was the love of her life, and sadly she lost him, but she had no closure because what I think was the inadequacy of the investigation. She never could put closure to her relationship with this boy who she says continually to me, and I know quite well. So as a result of this, I know quite well. He was the love of my life. He was the love of my life. And she had been engaged 3 times subsequently. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you someone can't settle down. She said it wasn't the department's fault that Fred encountered something and was lost forever. It wasn't their fault. What I do attribute to them is a flawed investigation. And I think it is a flawed investigation. I don't think the right questions were asked. I don't think the right people were approached. For instance, as far as I can see in the FOI documents, no one approached the Cape Otway Lighthouse. There were observers in that lighthouse. And yet there was a handwritten note about a strange green light flying around in the sky. A handwritten note, and it's in my book. No one approached the local constabulary at Apollo Bay to say, did anyone see a plane fly past? No one approached the establishment where Fred hired the plane. No one approached the establishment where Fred hired the plane to say, what was he like? Did he have personal problems, do you think?
What was his mental state? Yeah. What was
his mental state? They didn't put a picture together, Jimmy. They didn't put a picture together. And they come out with all these findings. Look, it's still an open, it's still an open book.
I have like 5 questions that are all related. So let's touch upon a few of these. Yeah. There, officially, we don't have much to go on. We know when he took off. We know the flight path. We know when he started to head southeast to King Island. Okay, so we know that we have his last radio communication. Outside of that, everything now is thrown into theories and hypothesis on this. And there are so many different versions. When he flew the plane to another airport and landed it and started another life and headed off into the distance. There's that. Which, by the way, don't you have tail numbers? The company that rented him the aircraft, are they concerned about was there a search? What about the boats that are in between Australia and King Island? What did they observe in the sky? Was there a search that went out for his plane by the Australian Coast Guard and the Australian Navy? What were the efforts that were put into all of this? Or is it completely just written off, and the UFO aspect, right? There's that. Or was it another plane that he almost collided with? All of this should have been in an investigation, all of this compiled together. But it just seems like it was dismissed that this kid just decided to drive his plane into the water. It's like all of these situations, Vic, can't be true, right? They're all over the place, aren't they?
They are all over the place, and there's no heart to it. There's no common finding to say we really think this is what's occurred, because they can't back it up, Jimmy. They can't back it up. There's nothing there. Now, the plane was owned by a doctor at the time, Dr. Cephas Day, and he'd cross-hired it to Southern Air Services, where it got hired. It was in good order. It had only recently come out of a service, and it had been flown between when it came out of the service and when Fred flew it. All right. Now, I believe, word of mouth, it was a couple of years before the insurance paid out. But do you know, because, I mean, they had probably had concerns. They probably thought, well, you know what, I've got to listen to all this scuttlebutt and we've got to listen to all this and make sure that the plane hasn't been sold off somewhere. But you can be assured they would have done their homework before they paid out.
That's right.
There were no aircraft parts that showed up with those serial numbers, right? There was not a plane that showed up. I mean, that is just an atrocious accusation that, you know, he had personal problems or he just wanted to get out of town. And well, I can tell you, and in my book I go into this, how much he had going on and how much he loved Rhonda. I mean, they'd go out to dinner and he'd organise, you know, a violinist to play by the table, you know. Does that sound like someone who was going to take his life? But look, and aside from that, Jimmy, the subtle point is here, she was going with him that night. She was going to go with him that night, but she got held up at work, and it was all pre-phones. It was 78. And it was about probably an hour's drive from Moorabbin Airport to where she worked, across the city, a bit close to it, or even, maybe more, I don't know, but it's a long way. And her trip evaporated because she got held up at work. Her lift. So she couldn't make it to get on the, but he didn't know that, you know, he was just a kid sitting in an airport. He wanted to take her flying. They wanted to go down to but they were going out later. And his main focus was he had a couple of $100 cash in his pocket from his Air Force friend, Ronald Grandy, and they were going to Ronald Grandy's place that night for drinks and dinner or whatever. And Ronald said, if there's crayfish available, buy some crayfish. Now, he waited and waited, and he departed just about, well, not enough to get him there. He got to King Island. If he had kept flying, he would have got to King Island 19 minutes after last light, which is not a problem. The general consensus was that he was definitely, you know, his flight was to be called into question because he never ordered lights at King Island. But I've gone into the records of that aeroplane and how much fuel it was carrying. He was carrying 6.5 hours fuel. He could have flown anywhere with it, all right. And people can.
He could have flown to Tasmania. He could have flown to Tasmania.
He could have easily. He could have easily done that. But the point of it is, the point to make out about this is, on a beautiful, clear night, there's nothing to stop him from saying, can you organise your representative to be on the ground? Turn the lights on for me, please. That is just normal. You know, can you bring the officer back in, turn the lights on? He was 20 minutes away. So all that stuff about him not ordering lights, like they're in, you know, the inference is he didn't order lights, so he was probably not going to go to King Island. like he was suicidal. So I mean,
Right.
it's absurd. It's an absurd accusation. So there's that side of it. But more to the point, I've got people that heard the plane and saw the plane go past, and this late in the day, 48 years later, I've connected what I can and joined the dots that I can, and they are gossamer threads, Jimmy. They're not, they're nothing standing out here. These people have passed away now, some of them. Now, you can do the timeline and you measure the distances and the time people saw planes, and then you put MERV into it, and it all falls into place. But probably one of the clinches was when I went to interview the local policeman who was on duty at the time. I chased him up, and again, no one had. And I asked him, Brian, who was the sergeant? Who was in charge at Apollo Bay when Fred went missing? He said, that was me. I knew him. And of course, he told me that. I'd forgotten. Like, it's a lot of years ago. He said, that was me. I was acting sergeant in charge for a number of years. And I was acting sergeant in charge that night. And I was acting sergeant in charge a few days later. And this is crucial. A few days later, a school group came in to the police station to make a report. And there was a young child there who was speech and audio compromised. Couldn't hear, couldn't speak. So had a problem with communication, but he had his little friend who was doing the talking for him, she said the teacher had driven them in from a place called Blanket Bay. In those days, it would have been a good hour's drive on a dirt road. The teacher had driven them in specifically to make this report. The young boy had seen a body floating in the water, not far, just north of Blanket Bay. He'd seen it alone. And when he ran back to the other children and got the teachers, they went back and they couldn't find it. Now, the currents run fairly hot there, and I'll talk about this again. I explain this. The currents run fairly hot in that area. So this body was parked up against the rocks north of Blanket Bay. And Brian said this to me. He said, the child was genuine. I've got no doubt that the child was making a genuine report. I went into that in some detail with his friends and his teachers, and they all thought that he was of good character and he wouldn't have made it up. But crucial to this, Jimmy, crucial to this, you asked what else have we got? Crucial to this was that body floating in the water, and it had a uniform on. Now, Fred was part of the Air Force Air Corps training cadets. And I said to Brian, it just goes to show you the way the wheels turn, and do you think this was meant to be? I said to Brian, so what colour was the uniform? And he said, the child kept saying like a policeman's uniform, which is blue and navy blue pants. Something in my mind, call it fate, call it anything, for a number of years, thought, well, it can't be Fred anyway. I mean, a body, that's pretty serious stuff.
I mean, would Fred have flown in his Australian Air Force?
Yeah. And I talk about this in detail in the book.
Right.
Yes, he would have. He would have. He was going out that night to an Air Force. Ronald Grandy was the senior person at the Air Force in the area, and he had great designs on being part of that scene. So he did wear his not the only time either. He had worn it before. Now, I got confused. I became confused, which is, not like me at all. But hey,
I do it every day. I do it every day, Vic.
I got confused, and I don't know why I did this. Call me, I feel like Columbo now. I don't know why I did this. Anyway, the report was that he was in a uniform, and it was a blue uniform. And I thought, you know what? It's not Air Force, because Air Forces are navy green, like a khaki uniform. Why I thought that, I don't know. But at some point, the penny dropped. Whoa, wait a minute. Whoa. Air Force uniform, cadet uniform is blue, like a policeman's uniform. And so things really started to fall into place there. So Brian gets this report from the kid, and that afternoon thought enough of it to call down another acting, Ken Taylor from Colac, another hour away. He came down, and they sort of mid-afternoon, they went down, they drove down, and they attended the scene. Brian put on his scuba gear. Wasn't actually scuba, it was snorkeling and flipper. And he's a pretty like he spends a lot of his time in the water. He's really, he knows his way around. And he's getting on now, but he always has, and loves fishing and all that stuff. Pretty outdoorsy kind of guy. He said, I swam around for about 20 minutes. He said, I couldn't see anything. I'll let it go. Now, this day and age, a report like that would have engendered a lot of response, like choppers, whatever. There would have been a serious response. But it was 1978, Jimmy, and things were different then, and not much else was done beside that report. Now, it's 48 years later. I don't know who the school was. I don't know who the child was. But if you link that finding with the timeline of Fred on descent to where? He'd come back from Cape Otway. He'd encountered this thing. He turned around, Jimmy. He was at 4,500. And if you read the book, and I don't have to ask anyone to read the book, but if there are people who know anything about UFOs, and I can just hear all the heads nodding when I say this, when one of those things comes close to you, your electronics start to fail, your engine starts to fail. That's exactly what Fred reported on the night. He said, my engine's running rough. I got it set 23, 24, and it's running rough. It wasn't actually a status report, but he had set it to that, and then he went on to other things. He couldn't maintain altitude. That's what I maintain in the book, but he had 4,500 feet to lose, and he could have pushed the nose down, and he could have made it up in 6 minutes. He could have been back from the part I've plotted on the chart. He could have made it back to the circuit area where Merv saw him that night. He could have made it in time. But, and this is the other part of the story, Jimmy. Excuse me. I just got to have a drink.
Yeah, and so Merv is on land, right? He's on the coastline with his family.
He lived there. He lived in a apartment.
Yeah, he lived there. And so Frederick, so what you're saying is from where Merv saw him, he was coming down, he was at 5,000 feet or thereabout. And what you're saying is that because his engine was now running rough, he probably turned around and tried to make it.
Let me just go through this. Apollo Bay is just near Cape Otway, about 7 nautical miles, all right, from Cape Otway. So Fred's gone down to Cape Otway and turned hard left to pick up his track to King Island, which is almost a right angle. Now, the pilot in me has always sort of cut the corner. You don't want to have to be a dude and fly all the way right over the top of the lighthouse. You cut the corner. They reported that they hadn't heard an aircraft that night, which is consistent with him cutting the corner and going south, all right? That could put him slightly closer, taking up his track, slightly closer to Apollo Bay when things started to turn bad.
Right.
Now, so he's made this report. He's reported this thing. He's reported his engine running rough. Now, you've got to put yourself in his shoes. What's he thinking? I've got to get this thing on the ground.
Get
the engine's running rough.
Yep.
I don't want to fly across 50 nautical miles of water, with an engine that's playing up. And even if this thing departs and the engine comes good, how do I know it's not going to reappear halfway across to King Island? That's not a place I want to be in.
No.
So
plus it's date night. He's got to get back to Rhonda too, as well. right?
Spoken like a true American and a Californian too. I would say, yeah, that's what comes straight into your mind. But it is relevant. He did want to get back.
It's hugely relevant. He had plans. The plans were get to King Island, get some seafood, right? Load it back up on the plane, get back, and head over to his friend's spot with his girlfriend and cook up some fresh seafood. That's a pretty good plan.
One you and I would be delighted to do. Land, pick up the love of your life, go out with the seafood, be in the company of your friends. It was on his mind. There's no question about it.
Yep.
I would just like to use that as a caption, Jimmy, to say that he didn't have suicide on his mind. He had life on his mind.
That's right.
He was this kid was fully alive. And I could just tell he was in trouble with the law for busting through cloud, which, young pilots do. I won't say.
Hold on. With your accent, just let me back up and just say to everybody, because this is also relevant. Attack.
I'm speaking Australian. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You attack the person. He's now a UFO nutter, right? They put that right. Yeah. Failing his test, and the other point that they made, which is what you just said, is he flew into a cloud. He wasn't cleared yet to do such a maneuver. He had 150 hours flying time, and you stay out of the clouds. And now they want to use that as a personal attack on him too, and that he was possibly going to be prosecuted for that, and that this was weighing on his mind. I would say he's 20 years old. Hell yeah, you're going to fly into a cloud.
Hang on, Jimmy. I should be interviewing you. You know more about this than I do.
I love this.
You've done your homework.
I love this.
You've done your homework,
Jimmy.
Jimmy. He was going to get booked for flying through cloud. What has that? They put that in the FRO. What has that got to do with a missing person report? It's all about discreditation. They wanted to set him up as being a flake. If you want to use the American, they want to set him up as being a flake, which he was anything but. All right, he's a kid pushing the limits. And do you know what? Pilots, just by their very nature, they're not shy retiring types. They're happy to give it a go. And Fred got stung a couple of times for flying through cloud, which was pending. But what does that tell you? It tells you he had the mental acuity, and he'd already known what it was like to be in cloud and to suffer from spatial disorientation, and he chose to do it. He got spotted a couple of times, and they would have been pretty serious, because to set up a report is not a small thing, and he would have been pretty convinced that Fred was out there pushing the envelope when he shouldn't have been. But what does that tell you? It tells you he was supremely qualified for the conditions that prevailed that night, which were very, very, very docile conditions. They were beautiful bluebird evening, looking out over the Otways. He would have seen that. My 8-year-old son could have flown that plane right side up that night. You just look out the window. So the spatial disorientation thing was just, it was a beat up, and there were other things too, like, Fred saw his aviation lights in the water and he mistook them for a UFO. What are they smoking? What are they smoking, man? Jimmy? I don't.
Don't forget about Venus, right? They got to throw that in too.
Venus or Uranus or whatever it is. Look, I don't get it. I don't get that they could put up so many pathetic arguments. And not only that, here's a kicker here. If he saw his lights in the water that night, he was miles outside of radio coverage. He wouldn't have been able to talk on the radio. He was below radio coverage. He was miles out. You can't do it now, even with the improved conditions. You can't fly up there, go close to the water, and get Melbourne out there. You can't do it. And there they are making a report like that. They didn't think this through. They didn't want to think this through. I mean, the big question is why. It's as big a story to me as the UFO. All this. You know, there was no consideration, and it ruined people's lives. Now, I just want to bring in something else. Like you say to me, you know, all these years later, there's not. But when you get enough of these things and you start bringing it together, it's not more just, it's no more a pile of bricks and a pile of timber. It starts to look like a house. And Fred's father was a very distinguished man, Guido. From what I can see, he was a distinguished Northern Italian, very principled man. And Italian was the main language at home, which didn't help him really when it came to doing his exams either. You know, a bit of an issue there. And I had a lot in common with Fred. You know, I'm from Italian immigrant family too. And a lot of my stuff is parallel. You know, now Fred's father used to go over. I was speaking to Pat O'Meara, Merv's widow, lovely lady, and we're chatting. And I said, "Look, Pat, you know, I'm not far from finishing this book. Thanks for your patience, and I'll make sure I get you a copy." You know, and she said, "Oh, Vic, it's a shame Merv's not here to see it." You know, the normal thing. And she said, "Oh, Guido would have loved it too. He used to come over here and talk to Merv." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, yeah. Guido used to come over and talk to Merv all the time." I said, "Guido, Fred's dad?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "He is all through the FOI documents. His name is all through the FOI documents. Permission to Guido, writing to Guido, blah, blah, blah." Are you telling me that Guido didn't say to the authorities, "There's something happening down at Apollo Bay. There's a guy that saw an aircraft with a thing behind it." But even forget the thing behind it. It was an aircraft at the same time, the same location as a missing aircraft. That should have centered, the search should have been centered absolutely 100% there. But it wasn't. There was, and Ross, who is a pretty well-connected man, I'll just keep his name as Ross. He said, "We flew down there the next day, Vic," and he said, "There was no one. There were no radio calls. There was no search happening, nothing." Now, I don't know why, but had they gone down there and searched, they may have found that plane that day. He's come back from Cape Otway on descent, and this is the other thing. This is the other complicating factor. When I bought a plane actually up in Portland, Maine, back in 87 or 88, and I flew it across America in winter. Landed in San Francisco, took the wings off, put it in a box, brought it back, and I worked it for a while back here in Australia. And part of that work was carrying crayfish, and I had to fly up and down the coast the same route that Fred was doing, because that was the rules at the time. And I would fly past, I'd be on instruments, but I'd be high. And I'd fly past all the time. I'd look down, I'd say, "Now, where's that bloody strip at Apollo Bay?" It's so hard to see. In those days, it was just a bush strip. Dr. Ralph Capone, who was a bit of a wild man, or, you know, I don't know, call him an Aussie, whatever you like. He used to taxi his plane 2 kilometres along the road to get fuel at the local petrol station, and the local policeman used that's American, Jimmy. That is actually something he must, because he flew in the war, and I reckon he's learnt that from Americans. But anyway, he did, and the strip was in that ilk. It was clearing in the trees. Now, I can remember myself looking down before it became the strip it is today. It's a bitumen strip, but I have a photo of it last night in the book. It was bloody hard to see. And the one thing that I did pick it out from was I'd look down, I'd see the windsock, I'd see more precisely, they'd put a white cross next to the windsock because it was so boggy you couldn't land there. And that's the sign to say this airfield's shut. For whatever reason, it's shut. And I'd see the white cross and I'd say, oh, it must be in there in that little valley there somewhere. Okay. Now it's more developed now and it's prominent. But even so, even now, you get there at last light and if you don't know it, you've got to know where to turn and where to line up your approach.
You've got a problem. Let me ask you this really quick, and then we're going to head towards a break. When you say a bush airstrip, so you can't land like a Cessna 150 with small tires. You need like a bush set of landing gear.
You can. This strip is a safe strip when number one, you know where it is. It's parked in against high ground. It's slightly uphill. It's a safe strip, 750 meters. As a developed strip today, it wouldn't have been that in those days because it was just it had power. But the thing that deteriorated this strip badly was when the wind blew. It gets tricky in there in a bad southwester or northwester.
Well, the question is, did Frederick have the talent and the equipment?
No, and I'll talk about this. He not only would he have trouble finding it at last light with seconds to spare, he was not checked into that strip. He would have definitely had a shot at landing because he had no choice, but he couldn't see it.
Right.
He was committed to getting that on the ground, but he couldn't see it. Now, I try and put it all together. I think he turned around, came back to look at it again, and flew past the strip and couldn't maintain altitude, and he ended up in the water somewhere off Blanket Bay or Cape Otway. The currents come back towards Apollo Bay at 4 kilometers an hour or 4 knots. So they're pretty strong around the Cape. So given and this is the other thing, I keep saying this is the other thing. Fred couldn't swim. And we should probably visit this after the break.
Okay. Well, let's take our break here. This case, I love this case. Tonight, we're talking about Frederick Valentich, 1978. Vic, stay right there. We'll be right back after this short break. They always say it, right? This is Australia's Roswell. This is Britain's Roswell. This case is all of that. We will continue more with Vic after this short break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. I am hosting, speaking, and presenting once again for the Conscious Life Expo, the largest conference of its type in the world. February 20th through the 23rd, 2026 at the LAX Hilton. Speakers, event, and schedule easy. Just visit consciouslifeexpo.com. I will be hosting and speaking at the Sedona Ascension Retreat, March 20th through the 22nd, 2026 in Sedona, Arizona. Amazing list of speakers, and it's beautiful Sedona. Come and hang out with us and just go to SedonaAscensionRetreats.com. I'm heading back to the Midwest for the Contact Modalities Expo, May 1st through the 3rd, 2026, in Delavan, Wisconsin, at the Lake Resort. It is beautiful. This is a great conference right in the heart of the Midwest, where I'm from. I'll see you there. Just go to Contact Modalities Expo, that's XPO.com. I will be hosting and presenting once again at Contact in the Desert. That's May 28th through June 1st, 2026, the largest UFO conference in the world. Come and hang out with us June 23rd through July 1st. Tickets and everything else that you need is at contactinthedesert.com. Want to change your life? Want that paradigm shift? Then visit Peru with Brian Forster and myself for the Inca Celebration of the Sun, June 23rd through July 1st, 2026. A full 10 days of visiting the country, all of the amazing sights, and of course, the celebration of the winter solstice. It's all simple to do. Go to hiddenincatours.com. Come join us for the Monty Python Scotland Tour, August 1st through the 9th, 2026. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event where you get to go to the castles from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. August 1st through the 9th, 2026. Just visit HaleyARamsey.com. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut.
Jimmy Church, Gaia TV, Fade to Black, here at Machu Picchu with Brian Forster and Hidden Inca Tours. Amazing tour so far, Brian, but we're here to announce what we're going to do next year in 2026. What's going on?
Okay, November 2026, we're going to have our major tour of Peru and Bolivia, either a pre or post tour of Paracas and Nazca on the coast. And then after that, 6 days in Easter Island.
Bucket list, Easter Island. Come join Brian and I and his amazing team here at Hidden Inca Tours for Peru, Bolivia, and Easter Island. Signing out. Say goodbye, Brian.
Bye, gang.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we're talking about the Frederick Valentich UFO case in Australia that happened in 1978 with Vic Bongiorno, live from Australia, by the way. Great conversation. And let's continue. Vic, one thing that stands out for me in this case, and there's a lot of things, but if his plane went down on the coast there at Cape Otway, where's the debris from the aircraft? Something should have floated to shore, something, even though there wasn't any search for, but somebody would have seen something if that was the case, right?
You're correct, providing the plane disintegrated on impact. Now, had it been a case of spatial disorientation, Jimmy, the water landing would have been at speed and out of control. In that case, there would definitely have been debris. There would have been a life jacket, a seat, cushion, or some, documents or aircraft fuel. He was carrying a lot of aircraft fuel. That would have been apparent. I talk about this in the book, and there was a 15-knot north westerly wind blowing that night. And just looking at his timelines, I've proven that the winds were exactly as forecast that night. Had he turned into wind and landed that plane into wind, it would have been entirely survivable. Water landings are, and the figures show this, quite survivable. And even though a Cessna like that, we're looking at a plane with a high wing, so the fuselage and the pilot are underneath, and the wheels are sticking out, and they're fixed gear. They're not retractable. Okay, so you can't skid along like a surfboard. So looking at it practically, I think the scene might have been that had he got it into wind, and look, that meant he would have had to turn it toward the headland. He would have had to turn it toward the headland and land it toward the headland, which is extremely challenging. It could have been past Cape Otway, though, which would have given him a bit more room. Now, had he done that, he would have got it down to something like, 45 knots landing speed, which is entirely survivable. Had he not done that, it would have been 75 knots landing speed, because not only you're neutral, you've got to add the tailwind. Do you know? Mm-hmm. So I believe he's turned it into wind and put it down because there was never any debris sighted. So that's part of the book where I say I would love to see a search for the plane again. Given the equipment we've got these days, it's entirely possible to find that aircraft, but it probably had a bit of a tendency to float a bit because it had all that fuel in the wings, which is lighter than water, a lot lighter than seawater too. It would have had cavities, and it may have flowed back up the coast in the northeasterly direction. So it may not be, but Fred's body, from what I can tell, appeared at Blanket Bay, which is a couple of miles back from Cape Otway. That's where it appeared. So ostensibly, he's landed somewhere southwest of there and drifted back and ended up at Blanket Bay. Now, he didn't have a life jacket on, and I'm sure, and Rhonda, his fiance, says he never wore life jackets. He'd been to King Island before. He never wore life jackets. I can speak from experience. In those days, I was doing Bass Strait crossings too. Not so much the time I said when I couldn't find the airstrip, but earlier in the day, you're almost a girly girl if you ask for a life jacket. It was a different mentality then. Safety is paramount now, but in those days, I don't think it was drummed through Fred's head. Wear a life jacket. The regulations then and now state that you don't have to wear, and I think this is a mistake, by the way, you don't have to wear a life jacket if you're above 2,000 feet and outside of gliding distance to land. Now, I believe that it should be mandatory to wear the life jacket when you're outside of gliding distance to land. He didn't have his life jacket on that night. I'm convinced about it. And he landed that aircraft, every chance that it flipped in the water, but the wing may have been some sort of a buoyancy, temporary buoyancy for the aircraft. May have allowed him to get out in the dark, but you know what? He couldn't swim. He could, according to Rhonda, he could dog paddle at best. Now this is all heading in the wrong direction.
Right. I have flown in a small private plane over the Pacific Ocean. As a matter of fact, my friend said, "You fly it," right? Okay, all right, I'll do this. He never pointed out life jackets to me. And you know what I mean? It wasn't, if something was to go wrong, do you look for a life jacket, or does that conversation come up at that point? I hope that it does. But in Frederick's case, if you're landing on the water and now the plane has stopped, you're looking for that life jacket. I would, yes. How about a life raft? Let's take it one step further. But
Jimmy, Jimmy, you know, in the panic of an upturned aircraft in the dark, I believe it was this, and I say this in the book. I believe it was the single most, the biggest error made that whole day was the fact that he wasn't wearing a life jacket. I believe it was the turning point, because when it started to all turn bad, and I've done this, I've been in an aircraft at altitude where I've decided for one reason or another, I want to put my life jacket on. Okay. Well, I can tell you, if you haven't got an automatic pilot, it's a lot of work. Slide the seat back, undo your belt, pull the life jacket on. Now, these days, it's just clip. In those days, it was tabs, tie them up. Get back in the seat, put the life jacket on, put the seat belt back on, slide your seat forward, tension the seat belt, and hope that you're plane. Now, he's on descent, and he's dot feet above a dark sea. Him doing that with probably compromised electrics and compromised engine power and trying to get a radio call out, there's no way known he could have done that. He couldn't have done it. He couldn't have got his life jacket on. The cards were dealt the minute it started turning bad at 6 minutes past 7. He couldn't. He was not going to get his life jacket on. So he was then committed to swimming. I believe became separated with that vital bit of equipment, and he was committed to making dog paddle, which is what he was good at, unfortunately, to the coast. And unfortunately, he's perished doing that. Now, there's lots of other weird stories about what happened to Fred. I believe absolutely that's what happened to Fred. And as I said, it was just good luck that I ran into these people, ran into various bits of information that allowed me. I didn't have to bend anything. I've remained extremely truthful in this, and I've remained practical. Now, there was something else that I haven't mentioned. There was a guy down at Cape Otway. I don't know if you've ever heard about the photographs that were taken down there, Roy Manifold.
I have. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you can look that up on the net now. And now they were taken as a matter of fact by a man trying to, because in those days it was all analog, celluloid and stuff, and he did a time exposure of the setting sun. And they were camped at fishermen's huts, which have since been pulled down. They were down near Cape Otway. Or they were back towards Apollo Bay a bit. And he took a photograph and on time exposure, and a couple of weeks later he had it developed, and he thought, what's this? And he'd accidentally taken a photo of something that looks just weird. It looks like a bumblebee to me. I just can't work it out. It looks weird, and it caused a lot of interest. Now, he heard a plane go past, and Jimmy, to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, he was never approached by the authorities to give a statement. Did you hear a plane? Did you see a plane? What was your photograph? Blah, blah, nothing. It's just another example of nothing. But it gets better. It gets better, Jimmy. Now, I don't know if you know about this, but you mentioned Westall before. And I might just mention it's the 60th anniversary this Saturday, which I'm going to.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that nuts?
60, yeah, crazy. So I'm going to that anniversary, and those photographs that he took, they went across the Pacific, and they were analysed. To the best of my knowledge, they were analysed by the very best. And they said, and that included NASA, to my knowledge, that they said, we can't see a fault in this. We don't think there's been any, this is a photograph of something. It hasn't been imposed, or, it's not a double exposure, or whatever the likely scenarios were. So, okay, he's just a straight up guy, and they're a straight up family. They really didn't want to create, they weren't out to make a buck or anything, is what I'm saying. They didn't want and now she's remained fairly close she holds her cards close to her chest. These the ones I spoke to. And look, after all these years, she's probably sick of people ringing. But I did have a short conversation with her back in 2018 over the phone. I said, Mrs. Manifold, I don't want to take your time up. I know you've spoken to a lot of people, but I want to ask you one question, if you would be so kind. Did those photographs disappear out of the bank safety deposit box? And she said, yes, they did. Now, this is 20 years later, they went back to look at them and the photos and the negatives were gone. What do you make of that, Jimmy? Who would have the wherewithal to do that stuff? Do you know? Why is it so important that we don't?
Right. And it is very, very typical, isn't it? When these kinds of incidents happen and there's something that is outside of the normal, all of a sudden everything just goes sideways. I'm going to stay on the Frederick case, but Westall's a really good example of that too, as well. Where you've got hundreds of witnesses. The event happened not only over a town, but over a school. There's that element of it. But with all of these witnesses coming forward and the local press and the local TV, all the interviews of the kids are gone. They're not there. They're not at the TV station anymore. Another when it comes to Westall, that the Air Force, right now, there were uniformed officers that were reported by many people there. All of that doesn't exist, right? There's like nothing, and this is a big case with hundreds of witnesses. And all of the significant stuff that was tied to that case just seemed to disappear, didn't it?
It gets me angry when I have spoken. We're going to get on Westall. Can I just mention the name of my book at some point here?
You can do whatever you want. You're the guest.
Okay, sorry. Give myself a plug. It's Frederick Valentich, Double Dark. Okay. Now, we're moving on to Westall. I've spoken to a lovely lady who's my age. She was 12 when she saw, she was at Westall and she saw this. Her name's Terry Peck, and she's just been a wonderful person and never no closed doors, very, very open, very, very, very keen to talk about her experience. I said to her, Terry, tell me about the day, amongst other things. We spent some time at her house and chatted. And she said, I said to her, how far away were you from that? She said, from here to you. She said, I was right up against it. It was just there in the paddock. And I was standing there looking at it as a kid. And we spoke about it. And she said, I said, so what happened? Just explain it. We spoke for quite some time. And she said what it looked like. And she said it slowly lifted up, turned on its side, and it went zoop, straight to altitude. And there were two others there. And they were sat there together, and then they disappeared. And I said, okay, so like they flew off, or they flew off fast and just, at speed and just gone. She said, no, Vic, no, you're not listening. You're not listening. They disappeared. They just went gone. And you know what? That is such a common report about these things. Now, I'll pull something out of the 6-minute interview, and I talk about this in the book, that no one else has. And Fred said, when he's talking to Steve, he said, it's just vanished. Now, I take him at his word when he says that. I take him to be literal. It's just vanished. He'd been talking about the aircraft consistently. Oh, it's coming at me from the southwest. It's over my head. It's doing this. I've lost, it's this. Why wouldn't he say, I can't see it now? Or at the moment I've lost sight of it. Why? No, he didn't. He used the specific words, Jimmy. It's just vanished. It's very typical of this behavior of these things. A lot of people report that. There's an old guy in my book, Clive Downey. I just felt compelled. He's got this letter in the FOI documents, and there's just a heap of stuff in these documents that just gets in your head, and you sort of wake up in the night and think maybe I'll just but Clive's letter's there, and I just passed out. There's a bloody letter again. Move that out of the way. And I thought, well, I'll read it. And you know what? It was sort of like this really tight little anal writing. And
All
I
right.
thought, it's hard to read, but I started to read it and I became fascinated with this guy. And he really gives a good report. He'd written this letter a few days after Fred's disappearance to old Guido, Fred's dad, to say, I think your son, we've seen things here. Your son might be somewhere. He may come back. It was a beautiful letter. But he does talk about the most amazing things. He talks about people in the area that say, this thing comes over our head, our engine stopped. What is that? How come everyone knows that stuff? Well, this is before, probably even before, it wouldn't have even been in the newspaper. It's sort of like, it's word of mouth stuff being passed on. The engine stopped. The radio quit. It flew off and everything came on again. That's exactly what he experienced. And I do believe that Fred experienced seeing it disappear too. This whole thing, this whole characterization of this thing was very typical of what was going on. And Clive's an interesting old guy. I couldn't find him. I looked up the net and I did everything and there was no record of this guy. And I thought, oh, well, he's probably passed on. But eventually, I won't go into it, but I eventually found it. He doesn't even own a mobile phone, and he doesn't have the internet, doesn't own a mobile phone. But you know what? Wonderful man to talk to. Just a wealth of information. One of these old minds that's an old timer, And so he was a great find, Clive. And what's more, it breaks the formality of the book. That letter. It's quite nice interruption in the book, and So his whole motivation was altruistic towards old Guido, to try and say, look, I think your son is probably still alive somewhere, but maybe even not on this earth, in my book, I do get a little romantic there a couple of times and say, who knows? But I think I know what happened.
Is it? Let's go back to the UFO part of the story, because we do have a 20-year-old pilot in his Cessna. I said 150. It was like a 172 or
182.
It was
182. Yeah,
182. Out flying solo, disappears. Okay. All right. Why wasn't he found? Why wasn't there a search? Okay, so we have all of that. But the UFO part of this case, with his discussions back to the tower about what was happening and everything else, is extremely significant. Now, for you, approaching this as objectively as you can, and you're a pilot.
It has been.
What's that?
It's correct. Objectively as I can. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to. You can't jump in the deep end of the pool. But this is a huge part of this case. For you now, after all of this, what are some of the conclusions? Do you think it was something not of this earth that he encountered?
Jimmy, I am in absolutely no doubt he had company that night. I'm absolutely no doubt he had company, and he was calling it like he saw it. I've got absolutely no doubt. What it was, I don't know. I do quote a late friend of mine, Air Vice Marshal Alan Reid, who was in charge of one of our Air Force bases here at the time, and I knew his son, I knew him. I said, Alan, did we have anything like that? Did the Americans have anything like that? He said, nothing. No, won't have, no. And he admitted, he said, look, you know what? This is a flawed investigation. He said, but they've probably got, to his words, he said, they've got preconceptions and they're not going to change. You know, that they just want this to go away. And that's, as I said, that's as big a story to me as the UFO. They just want this to go away. And do you know what's really, really weird? As if it's not weird enough now. Our local Department of Aviation, which is CASA, have a flight safety magazine. And as recent as last February, they put an article out in their safety magazine about Fred. All these years later, straight out of the blue. Now, all I can say is I have had a fair bit of contact with them in the last couple of years, and they knew I was on the horizon. And I don't know whether that had something to do with this article being, but it's just, it's to me, it's not believable. It's not feasible. And at the end, at the very end, they have a very personal attack on him. They say that he would have been at the point of retirement, and I'm sure, I'm not quoting verbatim, but I'm sure he would have realized that his career would have been, in aviation would have been best served on the ground. What right on earth did they have to smear a young man's memory in that way? What right, when their own investigation has been so patently inadequate? And you know what? It's almost, to me, Jimmy, it's almost to me worse than inadequate. I say in the book, I say it's either malpractice, incompetency, or complicity.
Yeah, cover up.
If I had to throw the dart, I would say it's complicity. If I had to throw the dart, everything I've seen would indicate to me that this was a setup. And young Fred did not have the support that he needed that night in searching for his craft, in his mishap, because why would that be? You ask yourself. And these are the things that just used to worry him in the life. Why wouldn't they have done that? I mean, I ask you.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask you. You're the pilot. Today, if you saw something and you're out, you're flying, how do you report it?
Oh, well, you know what, a lot of pilots, and I know them, have seen things, jet pilots, and said, listen, you know what, my medical is sacrosanct. I don't want to, I've seen something. What? You know what? The wife's giving me a hard time. I've got to pay the mortgage. And now I'm going to go and lay my career on the line and say, guess what? I saw something out there. They're going to say, come with us.
Yeah, it's time for a desk job. Yeah.
What does this picture mean to you? What does this picture mean to you? It's going to be a psych job straight away. They don't want to put their neck on the line with that, Jimmy. They don't want to do that.
The pilot that I was with when I flew over the Pacific. Now, this was a friend of mine from childhood. His name's Steve Freund. He recently died of cancer this year. Yeah. But ever since I first met him, this is back in high school. This is a long time ago. He was a guitar player, and we played a lot together. But his whole thing was, I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to be a pilot. And his mom was like a flight attendant for one of the airlines. It was just in his blood, right? And that's what he wanted to do. Well, he ended up a great career. Flew for Alaska. He flew for Southwest. Full on certified commercial jet pilot. Great guy. All right. So I asked him, we're out flying. And I said, so, you ever see anything? And he goes, okay, only once. And so we're talking with the headsets, right? We're flying. And I said, what happened? He said, off to my right, this white ball of light came straight at my plane, flew under the nose of the aircraft. My co-pilot sees it and it takes off that way. And I said, what? How big? Dude, it was a big, big white ball of light. Just flew right underneath and took off that. I said, and that's it. Did you call it? No, I didn't say shit. And I turned to my co-pilot. He's looking at it. We both, talked, but we didn't call it in. We didn't say anything. I'm not going to jeopardize any of it. He said, I still don't know what it was, but that's what I saw. And then, okay, I'll take it one step further. This is just recently too. I'm with, I can't say who. I won't take it any further than that, but I'm with a husband and wife. Husband flies for a large, major international carrier. Okay. All right. I won't go any further than that. But he said, so I kept asking him throughout the night. So, and he's like, no. And finally he pulls me aside. He goes, okay, man, I did see something. I said, well, what? He said, I'm flying over the Atlantic. He's going to Charles de Gaulle or Heathrow or something. He's flying across the Atlantic on a big plane. He told me what kind of plane it was. So it's a major, jumbo jet. And he said straight out in front of them, way off in the distance, and this is during the day, they see a black dot. And it's right in front of them. And they're flying and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he said it was up above them, but he said this is him describing this to me. It was a giant black domino. That's how he explained it to me.
Wow.
And
that's
yeah. And so and they fly underneath it. He described it as a mile wide, a black domino on its side, and they flew under it. And I said, okay, well, and he goes, man, it wasn't on our radar. We just saw it, and it was just
what year
right
was
in
that?
front of it. This is all recent. Now he told me the story. And he went into some pretty good
it should have come up on the dash, like on the TCAS.
Right.
It should have come up as traffic.
And it wasn't there. And he said it was ginormous. Now he told me the story a year ago, and the way that from the plane that they were flying, this is recent history. Okay. I don't want to say what equipment it was or anything like that. Privacy is paramount here. But he has never told anybody but his wife. Him and his co-pilot, he's the captain, by the way. He and his co-pilot talked the whole way to Europe about this, and but didn't report it. It wasn't on the radar. And he had told me, he said, Jimmy, what do I do about this? Who do I tell? I'm just not going to discuss it. And he was reticent, man, to even tell me. And he knows who I am. But
that pattern, I just told the wife, that is really an indicator that he's under pressure here. He didn't tell anyone else. It's kind of like, I need to talk to you about something, because he needed to get it off his chest. But there's you don't know what you're entering when you're getting into the realm of mental health and stuff in your career. And you guess what? You just don't want to, I'm not Captain Kirk here. I don't have to report this, and I'm not going to.
They're not going to. I fly a lot. I fly twice a month. Okay. All year long. I'm constantly flying. And every opportunity, Vic, this is not an exaggeration. If I see a pilot, I'm going up to him. I go up to every single one. and go,
You're
hey,
one of those.
I
You're
am
that man. You're that man.
Well, and so and I'll give you a classic example of this. We had to change equipment somewhere, out there somewhere, and they bring in a new plane. I also brought in a new flight crew, and it took about 2 hours. So I'm standing there, and here comes the new flight crews, four men in uniform, and I just go right up to them. Hey, man, I'm so and so, and okay, all right, and I go, I just want to ask you guys ever see anything? Right now everybody's talking about this. We've got Congress, we've got the New York Times, and the older gentleman of the four goes, nope. Just like that. And then the guy on the end points at the younger of the four, and he goes, whatever his name is, I think Bob has seen something. And the three of them look at Bob, and he goes, I did. Yeah. No, I'm not going to talk about it. But it was funny how the three of them called him out, and he didn't know. He said, yeah, I've seen it, but I have no idea. And this is, I think, where they are all at with this. Is there a safe space these days where pilots can report something?
Well, I think I think it's getting better, but a pilot's life is not all glamour. It's hard work. They've got to pass their renewals. They've got to pass their simulator. They've got to pass their medical. They're under enough pressure now. To say something that's not going to be verified, to make a report about an unverified light is probably hell. They probably just want to, they've got enough to deal with now. They probably just say, let it slide, let it slide. I don't need to be a hero here with my career. I've got an obligation here not to rock the boat. I've got commitments. I got my kids at school. I got my payments. And so there's a big incentive not to even talk about it. Jimmy, you can't verify it. So this day and age, but having said that, I mean, it's probably the best time. Earlier in the piece, and we saw plenty of pilots being vilified for being no one else but captain. And I talk about this, in the book. If you're captain, and I know Fred was just one out. He was by himself. But you know what? They're sticking pins in him. He's the problem. He's the problem here. He told the truth, and he's the problem. We can't deal with that, And it's the same with, look, I know it's a big jump, but, Chesney Sullenberg, on the Hudson. They started sticking pins in him straight away. And it cost him, it was emotional cost in that. It got dropped. But there are people out there that do that stuff. They're saying that with MH370, and I'm getting off the point a bit, but the captain is always the problem until he's proven not to be the problem. And I don't believe that the captain was the problem there with MH370 either. There's a whole line of thinking with that. We're not going to even get into it. But the pilot this night, Jimmy, he was the truth teller. He was telling it like he saw it, and suddenly he's the problem. He's the problem. We're going to dredge up everything about this kid, including, get this, including his secondary school reports. Right. We're going to put all that on. We're going to put all that on display, because you know what? He went missing, and we want him to stay missing. We don't want to know anything about him. Why didn't they follow up Merv's report that night? And he did make a report, but he said no one came and saw me. He said, I made a report, but no one came and saw me. Unfortunately, I didn't get the details of how he did it. But do you know why? And this is a question I asked you earlier in the night. Why would it be that they didn't follow Merv's report up? Why would it be? It's so obvious. You've got a plane in distress that very night. Forget anything else. You've got a plane. People heard a plane, saw a plane. That should have concentrated the search, but it did nothing.
No, and you had a location from Merv.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the point I'm making is here, Had they gone to the area and concentrated the search and found a body or found a plane, that would have been one thing. We've got closure here. We've got closure here. But what else does it do? It opens up a whole can of worms that they don't want to deal with. And that is to do with his report. Why did he fail? Why did he end up in the water? Because you've got to take him at his word. He had difficulties, he had engine problems, he had something in close quarters with him. But that they would have had to open that whole can of worms if they had have found the plane. The question would have been, so wait a minute. So you found the body, you found the plane, that's great work. Fred was a good pilot. He was known to be a good pilot. And I talk about this in the book. Why didn't he just climb back up to altitude and fly back to Moorabbin? Because he couldn't, Jimmy. Because he couldn't. And that would have been the salient point. Had they found the body and the plane, it would have been bloody obvious that he was, and all these other stories, like plenty of them about UFOs in the area, plenty of them. I will say that Merv wasn't the only one to see that plane. There was another lady, and I won't mention her name, but she's gone off the radar. She said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to give you a report, but I know she did see that plane. Plenty of talk, and it's so many years later now. It's kind of like, let it go, Vic. Let it go. Why are you rocking the boat? Just let it go. You know? And that's what they did.
Yeah, the whole thing reminds me also, because we had these same things happening in different cases. But when you look at Japan Airlines in Alaska and that pilot, that captain, Kenju Taruchi, I think it was his name.
Yeah.
So Kenju, now we have the United States Air Force involved with this. You've got a Japan Airlines cargo plane. You've got radar. You've got everything that's tracking. That's a huge flight corridor, as we all know, across Alaska for refueling and everything else. I sound like I'm some aviation expert. I'm not. It's just that I spend a lot of time on these cases and looking at them. And Kenju and his flight crew, very accurate descriptions, lots of communication with the tower and the Air Force base there. What happened to him? The FCC got involved. FAA, got involved. Flight recordings, data, radar, all of that all goes back to Washington. Of course, we know this now. What happened to Kenju? Kenju got clipped. He got placed at a desk and was silenced. And that's what these, especially at the commercial level of the pilot world, not of the Frederick Valentich world, right? 150, he's flying a Cessna 182.
He's still captain. And he's making a report.
That's right. And Kenju, that's exactly what no pilot wants to have happen to him. He was placed at a desk, and that was the end of the story. They don't want that to continue. The FAA part of it and the CIA and the Air Force, they were all involved with that case. There was something that went on there, but the pilot himself, no, he was silenced. And how many times do we have to hear this over and over again? Pilots are professional witnesses, and you are out there, all of the aircraft. Why? Well, it's part of your job, but you're also an aviation fan. That's why you're a pilot.
Do you know what,
aircraft.
Jimmy?
You know what I'm saying?
Do you know what,
right?
Jimmy? Yeah, I do. Do you know what, Jimmy? You know what's amazing about this? As if, it's not amazing already. But do you know his wife, his girlfriend? I said to her, because all through the report, it's Fred was obsessed with UFOs. That is rubbish. That is rubbish. That is not right. He wasn't obsessed with UFOs. His girlfriend said to me, if he was a UFO freak, I never knew about it. I never saw a scrapbook. He never spoke. The only time, and they took, Rhonda had an interview with these people. All right. Now she's a young girl, unaccompanied. She's a minor. She has an interview with these. I mean, they were going to get married. Fred had given her a friendship ring, right? And he had the engagement ring on lay-by at the Mooney Ponds jewelry shop. They were definitely in love. I mean, I've spoken to her without being too, without being too overbearing. I've gleaned that he was definitely the love of her life. And like he said, look, I don't want to go on about how much in love they were, but they were. And they were only young. And she said to me that they called her in for an interview. Oh, before that, sorry. She said to me, and I saw it in the reports. Fred was a UFO watcher. How do we get to this? How do we get to this conclusion? Because nothing that I saw backs that up. Not his friends, not her, not any scrap of information backs that up. The one thing they said, he said to her when they were parked at the top of a mountain we've got here at the back of Melbourne, lovely area. You park up there, it's a bit like top of Hollywood looking out over the lights. They went up there parking as a young couple, and at the time there were a lot of UFO movies hitting the scene, E.T. and Alien and stuff. It was all pretty Star Wars, but conversation, she related a conversation that she had with Fred when they were parking at the top of Mount Danhill. And he said, if a UFO landed, I'd love to get in it, but I wouldn't go without you. You've got no idea how many times that sentence has been trotted out, Jimmy. Lovers talk, and it's used to condemn this kid. Just plain and utter, there were no pillows there, but it could have been pillow talk. You know what I mean? Lovers talk. I wouldn't go without you, dear. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they've used that as being, terribly. But there was other things about that interview that really got me cross.
Who brought her in when she says they brought me in?
From the records I see, it was a Department of Transport interview.
Really?
Yeah. And they wanted to speak to her. Right. Now, look, I just got to be careful about what I say here. But they interviewed her in the most personal way. She's a good friend of mine. She's a no bullshit person. She's a lovely person. And she said, Vic, they asked me questions that I can't repeat here. And I said, what do you mean? What sort of questions could they ask you? And she said, personal questions. She said, about our sex life, about everything. And I'm saying, well, why would they ask a 16-year-old girl who, in Australia, that's the age of consent. Okay? 16 is the age of consent. It was set up in 1893. I think they probably use the reasoning, you know what it's about at 16. It's right or wrong, but we're not going to condemn kids. We're not going to slap a title on them and say you've broken the law. It's good when it's human. So that, for whatever reason, 16 is the age of consent here, but you don't become an adult till you're 18. Okay, so there's that area of greyness there. So they questioned her in depth about her relationship with Fred. Now, what did I glean from that? I kept that under my hat for years. I thought, what are they trying to do here? I don't get it. It was like the body in the water. I forget about it. Doesn't matter. Who cares? It's not. And then she said, there's something else though, Vic. I said, yeah, what like? She said, I never saw their faces. They were behind bright lights. You've got a 16-year-old girl in this interview without parental consent, unaccompanied, getting questioned like that. Why would they do that, Jimmy? They wanted, this is my opinion, call me silly, and just, you know what, they wanted to discredit Fred. They were looking for grounds to discredit Fred. You know, that was going to be another arrow in their bow. But do you know what? I'm sure their legal team said, unaccompanied minor, don't even think about it, won't stand up. And you know what? It would have made them look really bad too, that they should have trotted that out.
Yeah. And we have to, as we're at the end of this, by the way, Vic, brilliant conversation tonight, all of it. Why cover this up? And so I'm asking you, why cover this up? For me, looking at this whole thing, he encountered something not of this earth. That's it. And that's the cover up. They don't want that part of this out. He's just a kid. He crashed his plane. But is that the case? Is that why you cover this up?
Jimmy Church, he was a pilot, a young man in the wrong place at the wrong time. And my book goes into as great a detail as it can into removing that cloud of misinformation and discreditation to try and you know, vindicate him a bit, you know, and his partner. I believe that she deserves an apology. I believe that. My book, Frederick Valentich, Double Dark, spells all this out as best I can. It's not a long read. It's only 20 or 210 pages or something. It's not a long read. And guess what? I have pictures in it too, because I just love pictures in a book.
What a great conversation. And the Valentich case, Westall too as well. Oh, there's one other thing in the little time that we have left. There's one other thing about the Westall case that also goes into Valentich and so many other cases. The science teacher took pictures.
And
he had a camera.
Oh, no, sorry. No, the lady took the photographs.
Right. And they took her camera.
Never to be seen again.
Yeah.
You know what? They would be so important, those photographs. They were non-electronic. Like, you know, I don't think your phone would probably perform. I don't know. I just from what I've got. But those photographs are out there somewhere, Jimmy, and they're not our property. You know what? They showed up at one of the teachers' place, Andrew, and they threatened him. And they said, "We know you were drunk on the day.
Yes,
we know you've been drinking. And if you say anything, get this. If you say anything, I just love these people. If you say anything, we're gonna sue you under the Official Secrets Act. For God's sake, what's worth suing someone if it's a collapsed weather balloon?
Right.
How can you sue someone under the Official Secrets Act? There's something really, really important, and Westall is a great example of what they're capable of. A great example. Fred was more subtle. No one picked up the baton for Fred, and you needed to start moving rocks and stuff to see what's happened here. Fred got hung out to dry, Jimmy. He got hung out to dry. He found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it wasn't his fault.
Thank you so much, Vic. The world needs more of you. You know, seriously.
It's been a great pleasure.
It was just a great conversation, and we've got the links up for your book, not only in the chat, but we've got them over on our website too as well. And I look forward to our next conversation, man. Just thank you so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Enjoy the rest of your day out there in Australia.
Cheers.
Hey,
isn't that a great sign? Peace.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And I'm going to get out to Australia next year, so you and I need to go shoot a brew. Okay.
Oh. On the back porch, we'll look for satellites.
That's what I'm talking about. I'll talk to you. Thank you, Vic. Enjoy the rest of your day.
It's lovely talking to you. Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Yeah. Perfect night. Perfect night. Thank you so much, Vic. And Vic Bongiorno. And so we have the links up for his book, Double Dark. It's there, not only in the chat, but over at our website. Okay. So thank you so much, Vic. What am I doing tomorrow night? I think tomorrow night, Ben Hansen is here. Return visit from Ben. And tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about the social media aspect of disclosure. All of that and much more tomorrow night with Ben Hansen. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. But for now, all I've got is Go Backley Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Backley Tappy.